So what I'm about to talk about pertains to someone who is looking to get into this business as a scaled business, not as something that's going to be a lifestyle business where you're like selling at farmers markets and maybe a little here locally and all of that kind of stuff. What I'm speaking about and the considerations that need to go into it, I'm speaking about it from a path to scale. So if you are looking at raising crickets for just your family, or like I said, if you just want to do like farmers markets and maybe a couple events here and there, I think that's all very possible for one person to raise them, produce your products, all of that stuff. What I will cover in this video, I'm speaking about from a scaling into a larger business sort of a perspective. So please keep that in mind as you watch. So I've thought about how to address this next topic for the last couple of days about, what do I really want to say about it? How do I really want to present it? Because it's very personal and very difficult for me to tell you or discourage you from going after something just because it's hard, maybe. But one thing that definitely needs to be talked about that I think doesn't get spoken about in this industry or most industries in terms of with a business plan and things like that is you need to be really, 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 really honest with yourself about how much time, money, effort, mental space you have to devote to starting your cricket farm. And that will dictate overall what you can necessarily do. So I will tell you a little bit about what my last 2.5 years have looked like, and some of the underlying support factors and things that have made that possible, that if they weren't there, if any of them weren't there, none of this would be possible for me to have built this to what I built it into, and finally feel like I'm starting to turn a corner 2.5 years in. So I set out from the beginning with no interest of sourcing my crickets for my products from a single farm in North America. It's basically a single source for cricket powder and things like that. I had no interest in that. That seemed like a lot of risk to me. But I also wasn't entirely interested in doing a pure brand play either, of just having this product and going. Where I really saw the gap in the market was somebody to tackle the supply chain here in the US of figuring out how to get a stable, consistent supply of crickets. And in order to do that, I don't come from a entomology background. I have a bunch of finance degrees. So I figured I better learn how to raise crickets. And then as I learned, I would scale and I would produce products that way. So that was the plan. I would not recommend most people do that. I don't think that most people are in a situation where they can do that. They won't have the same support factors that I do around me that has made that possible. So you need to be really honest. And what I say really honest, do you have time to spend 100 hours a week for the next 5 years trying to get your cricket farm and your brand off the ground? If you don't even think about it. Do you have time to struggle through the first at least couple years trying to figure out how to actually raise crickets and get those scaled to a point where you actually feel comfortable that you can competently, and I put an emphasis on that, competently teach someone else how to do what you're doing. It's one thing to be able, you can hire employees right at the beginning. You totally can. But do you know what you're doing? If you don't, how do you expect them to know what they're doing? Do you really want them to learn all of the basics so that, you go take care of the sales and you don't do any of this? What happens if that person leaves? Unless they're a co-founder with you, do you want that kind of a risk? So be very honest with yourself in that respect. That's why I encourage people to start small. Start with something that they can manage. See if they like it. If you do and you're good at it, great. And if at that point you feel comfortable with teaching someone how to do it and you are quite sound in your ways, go for it. But what has enabled me to get where I am of building out this infrastructure, building out this supply chain, and I make no bones about it, I live in my parents' basement, and I have for the last 2.5 years. If that wasn't an option, I couldn't have done this. There's no way. I've bootstrapped this entire business with my savings that I earned in my previous career, and I live in my parents' basement. My parents provided me with my first room, shall we say, where I raised the crickets. So for that whole first year, I didn't have to deal with paying rent for a facility, paying extra utilities, paying all of that kind of stuff. They very much subsidized me in this in many ways, and if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't be possible. Even with all of that, I'm still pulling hellacious hours. I'm still treading water every day to try and survive. Absolutely, I've expanded. I have taught people how to raise crickets, but it has not been a quick and easy road to get there. To give you an example, and I say this flat out to my growers, especially for your first year, if you're not spending at least 20 hours a week, depending on the size of your barn. So and this is me assuming that you're under 1,000 square feet in whatever your barn's going to be. If you're not spending at least 20 hours a week in that barn, you are not going to be successful at cricket farming. There's just too many variables. You're not paying close enough attention. You may think you are, but you're just not. So especially for the first year, you're looking at the very least 20 hours a week at the very least. And I would say actually take that, multiply that by 1.5 to be conservative on it. And then anything that you are planning in terms of capital, things like feed and all of that, guarantee your efficiency isn't going to be there. All of those things. So be very conservative in your estimates on that stuff as well. And just be really realistic about what kind of time you have to devote to this. Again, trying to figure out how to farm crickets and trying to figure out how to build a food brand. If you've never farmed crickets and you've never built a food brand, it's going to be really, really hard to do both of those at the same time. It's really hard to do one of them at the same time and become very good at it. It's something that honestly I never mastered either way. Which is why I've moved more to a grower sort of a structure, so that can free me up to deal with the processing and deal with the branding side. But I had to get myself to a point where I was comfortable and knowledgeable enough to actually be able to give my growers a leg up and know that I could teach them well enough that they would have a stable supply. That was always super important to me and remains super important to me. So, if you're going down this road, I'll say it again, please be very honest and realistic about the time, money, and effort that you can put into it. Not everyone can live in their parents' basement like I do. Not everyone has a super awesome support system around them like I do. And not everybody lives in the middle of central Iowa where cost of living is stupid low. So be realistic about that. I don't know what else to say other than that. Again, not trying to discourage anyone, just you need to have an open conversation about what it's really going to take from a time commitment standpoint to make something like this work.